not flat nose, neither very long nose. It was in the middle. And وصف بأن أنفه دقيق صلى الله عليه وسلم. And also the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم had a beautiful ears. And they were, the size of his ear matched the size of his face and head. They were not bigger or smaller. His ear, the size of his ear matched the size of his head sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. And the Prophet ﷺ's head was not a small one. The Prophet ﷺ's head was a kind of a big. The Prophet ﷺ's bones in general were big bones. He had a built body sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, a big body. His shoulders were big shoulder. He has a very wide chest sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his shoulder was up, or were up, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, more than down like that. His leg looks in a very good shape, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. كان ضخم الكراديس يعني رؤوس العظام. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's skin in general, the color of his skin was white and almost, and some parts it go to like a rosy. And in some part was his skin's color was tan. And this is the area which is facing the sun. Like the Prophet ﷺ's hands and the Prophet ﷺ's foot or feet and his face ﷺ were tan from the sun. But when you see the Prophet ﷺ forehead and this part of his cheek, and when you see the Prophet ﷺ's body, like his stomach, his thigh, his back, were so white and mixed with like a kind of rosy. And this shows you that the color of his skin changed because of the sun. So it shows you that he was a human being sallallahu alaihi wasallam like others. And even his underarm sallallahu alaihi wasallam was white, so white. And this shows you the original color of his skin, because this part doesn't face the sun. Second thing shows you that he was clean sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not like some people today, male or female, if they don't take care of that part, the skin turn. If it's not clean enough, the color will change. Anyway, the Prophet ﷺ had a very beautiful neck, and the color of his neck were white, very close to the silver. And the Prophet ﷺ, as I told you, had a big shoulder, a wide chest, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. He was not a fat man, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but he was a big man, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He was built. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he might have overweight a little bit in the end of his lives, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But they always been described that his chest and his stomach were straight, on the same level. He never had his stomach standing out or bigger than his chest. It always been the same. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان صدره وبطنه سواء. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, he wasn't that very tall man, neither a short man. You consider him a tall man. كان للطول أقرب فخما مفخما عظيم الهامة معتدل الخلقة قسيم يعني تقاطيع جسده في غاية الجمال بادن متماسك صلى الله عليه وسلم. He had hands, and his hands صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم and his palm was, or were, his palms sallallahu alaihi wasallam were very soft. There is a meat in them. Were very soft. Anas said, I have not ever touched something more softer than the Prophet ﷺ palm. It was more softer than the silk, Anas said. And he had fingers, and his fingers were tall and big fingers, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. غليظ الأصابع صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. شائل الأطراف, يعني أصابع طويلة. And his palms صلى الله عليه وسلم were big and wide, not small. رحب الراحة. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his fingers, as I told you, were long and big fingers. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had knees, and they were big as the rest of his bones, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his thigh was so white, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as been described in several occasions, that some of the Sahaba saw his thigh, and he said it was very, very white. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had his foot were smooth, and he was not flat. He doesn't have flat feet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Flat foot, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's kind of curvy. What do you call it? Archy. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described that when you put the water in his foot, it will not settle, because it's not a flat. His foot, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's legs were not big. It were, as a matter of fact, described as أخمص القدمين, يعني دقيق القدمين. They were skinny. His legs, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't have a big legs, or there's no much meat in them, and therefore كان أنهس العقبين. يعني the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's aqib, which is his ankle, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where there's no meat in them. You can see the nerve, the Prophet's nerve, because there is not much of fat or meat there. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had hair in his body, and the hair of his body, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was distributed in his body in a way makes his body the most beautiful body. He had كان طويل شعر المسربة. يعني المسربة هو الشعر من النحر إلى السرة. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم had a hair, and this hair was straight. Start from under his neck, from the bone of the chest in the middle, as a straight line all the way down to his navel, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. كذا اسمها السرة. Navel. Yeah. It was like a straight line, not only one line like this, going all the way down. His hair, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it's a lot of hair. But in his chest, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the rest of his stomach and his back, he had no hair, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had some hair in his shoulder, on his shoulder.